Okay, so now we're going to look at what do we have to do if when we are solving a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula, if we have a negative underneath the square root, what do we have to do? Okay, so remember our quadratic formula is x equals opposite of b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so remember we've got to check, we've got to make sure that our equation is in standard form, and this one is, it's set equal to 0, and we've got x squared, then x, then our constant. So now we just need to identify what our a, b, and c terms are. So our a term here is 1, our b term is -4, and our c term is 5. Okay, so when I go to plug that in, the opposite of -4 is +4, plus or minus the square root, b squared, in parentheses, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 5, all over 2 times a. Okay, and remember, I like to just simplify what's underneath the square root, so I'm going to plug that in. -4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5, and we get -4. So this simplifies down to 4 plus or minus the square root of -4 all over 2 times 1 is just 2. Okay, so now remember from last week, when we have a negative underneath our square root, we have to get rid of that negative by bringing out an I. So this is really 4 plus or minus I times the square root of 4 divided by 2, okay? And so now I can simplify the square root of 4 like I would normally would if there hadn't been a negative there, okay? So if I do that, and we'll bring this over here. So 4 plus or minus I times the square root of 4 divided by 2, okay? If I do this, this simplifies down to 4. The square root of 4 is 2, so this is really going to be 2i divided by 2, okay? And so this is what your final answer is going to kind of look like. You've always got to check the 3 numbers that are in your equation, not necessarily the I, but like the 4, the 2, and the 2 here, and say, can this be simplified anymore? And this definitely can, because if you look, everything is divisible by 2. So the way that I like to simplify this, because when you divide something and you've got more than one term on top, this has to go to everything on the top of the fraction. So I like to write it as 4 divided by 2, put the plus or minus there, so we are not forgetting about our plus or minus right here, okay? And then we have 2i divided by 2, just so I make sure that I divide everything by what's on the bottom, okay? So here, that simplifies down to 2. We still have our plus minus. Here, the 2's cancel out, so we're left with I. So our final answer here is just 2 plus or minus I. And that's how we would leave that answer. I know it looks a little weird, but that's exactly how you would leave that answer. Okay? So I want to do another example with you. So now let's, for example 2, now let's say our equation is 8x squared plus 5 equals -4x. First thing you should notice about this equation is that it is not in standard form, so we have to take that and move it over here. So to do that, we're going to say plus 4x, and remember, I can't combine this with this because they are not like terms. X squared and x are not like terms, and 5 and 4x, they're not like terms. So we just have to put that in and make sure you put it in the right spot. It's got to go in the middle because it's the x term, and that is now set equal to 0. So now we can say, okay, A equals 8, B equals 4, and C equals 5. So when I plug that into our formula up here, we say the opposite of B, so -4 plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. And we want to simplify that down, only what's underneath the square root. So I'm going to say 4 squared minus 4 times 8 times 5. And I get negative 144. So I have negative 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 144. And if we want to go ahead and simplify that, and that is 2 times 8 is 16. Okay, so I'm going to bring this down here. So remember now, we can get rid of that negative by putting an I out there, and that gets rid of our negative. Divided by 16. So now I can say, hey, the square root of 144 is 12. If you don't know that off the top of your head, you can type it in the calculator. Okay, square root of 144 is 12. So this is really simplified down to negative 4 plus or minus 12i divided by 16. And again, we've got to check to make sure, are these three numbers, are they divisible? You know, do they have a least common multiple that they can be divisible by? And they do, okay? So again, how I like to do this is I like to split this up, okay, and give that denominator to both parts of the top number, okay? So negative 4 divided by 16, put our little plus minus there so we don't forget it, and then 12i divided by 16, and I'm just going to simplify these, okay? So in my calculator, if I say negative 4 divided by 16, and I say math enter, that's going to simplify down to a negative 1/4. So negative 1 divided by 4. We've got plus or minus. Okay, and now I'm going to simplify this. I'm going to say 12 divided by 16. Math enter, and that gives me 3/4. Okay, so don't forget your I there. So now I just bring that back together. So my final answer here is negative 1 plus or minus 3i, and it's all divisible by 4. And that right there would be my final answer.